Everyone, this is Mr. P here. I hope you can see me up in the upper right-hand corner with this webcam feature that I'm starting to use. I miss you all. I hope you're doing well. So this is lesson 8 of our series on the Black freedom struggle. And in this lesson, we're going to begin looking at nonviolent direct action used in the 50s and 60s by the Black liberation movement. During this period, it becomes known as the Civil Rights Movement. And our task by the end of this series of lessons on the Civil Rights Movement is to evaluate how successful nonviolent direct action was in furthering the cause of Black liberation. We'll also look towards the end at Chicano, Latinx, and Asian civil rights efforts as well. We've already done some work with that. We'll do some more moving forward as well. So you might notice some of these shots of the Montgomery bus boycott, or you might recognize sit-ins. We will be studying a lot of these movements. But this video is focused on trying to help us understand and define liberation, nonviolent direct action, and the overall understand the methods used. So this is really a video on creating and understanding frameworks that we will then apply with our case studies, such as the Montgomery bus boycott, the sit-ins, Birmingham, Poor People's Movement, etc. So I'm gonna kind of present this, and I think you might not see me anymore. So here we go. First, if we're trying to evaluate how nonviolent action in furthering the cause of liberation, we need to be able to define liberation. And I want to first remind us and acknowledge there are long traditions of integrationism and separatism in African American history. Traditions that sometimes visions compete with each other in terms of their vision for liberation, and sometimes complement each other, such as the vision of kind of separate Black churches that have political power but fight for integrating public transit and public accommodations and things like that, right? Sometimes they can complement each other, but they often will have they will also have competing visions. What are the ways that we can define liberation that some of these campaigns within the movement will push for? So civil rights, such as desegregating public accommodations, public transit, this is one way to define it and fight for a specific goal. Another goal would be political rights, such as voting rights, to end literacy tests and poll taxes, for example, and gain political power within the existing electoral system. Economic justice, redistribute land, gain a living wage, have affordable housing. Right? Economic justice is a way in which liberation is defined. We saw that vision clearly in the fight for rights of the porters in the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters and the Southern Tenant Farmers Union as well. Liberation can also mean security, safety from police brutality, for example. We're going to see that very clearly when we get to the Black Panther Party. Educational equity, self-determination, the ability of a group to define their own future. Some groups, like the New African Independence Movement, end up pursuing self-determination by demanding their own separate government and country even. And we'll get into that in a couple weeks. So it is the task of the movement, the Black freedom struggle, to pursue all of these things, and different campaigns will bite off different chunks, and campaigns are a smaller scale kind of piece to the movement. The movement is quite large and involves multiple campaigns. Campaigns are sometimes more localized, although they can be national, and have a specific goal and a specific timeline, or a number of specific goals. And so I want us to understand the theory of nonviolent resistance, which is a process of strategically disobeying people in power and groups in power by taking away the pillars of support so that folks can bring about changes in power and improvements in people's lives. Traditionally, we understand power as flowing from top down, but nonviolent resistance understands power as a foundation of support that that those in positions of power need in order to keep their power. What are these pillars of support? We'll go to my notes where I keep my lecture notes, you'll have, if you have like the slides open, you can read about some of those. I'm following Gene Sharp, someone who studies nonviolent resistance, where he talks about 6 major pillars of support that people in power need to, be seen as legitimate authority. They need to have human resources. They need lots of people who will work for the state, for example. They need the skills and knowledge of people to cooperate with them. They need, they need an ideology that kind of habituates people to obey the state, for example, to obey laws, even if those laws are unjust. They need material resources. So states, the degree to which they have control over property and natural resources, or the support of people who control natural resources, such as corporations. Communications and transportation, etc. And sanctions, ability to punish and use coercive power from the military or police. If the masses of people can take away those pillars, any one or combination of them, then they'll be able to either get the people in power to leave positions of power, or to get them to make changes to implement lasting improvements in people's lives. We're going to jump into a definition here of nonviolent action, nonviolent resistance. And so let me share my screen so you can get that quote a little bit larger. Gene defines nonviolent action, which sometimes referred to as resistance struggle too, as a generic term covering dozens of specific methods of protest, of non-cooperation, and intervention. These can refer to methods of protest, resistance, intervention without physical violence, in which members of the nonviolent group do or refuse to do certain things. So they can commit acts of remission, refusing to perform acts which they usually would perform or are expected to perform. Or they can commit acts of commission, where they would do things that they might not normally do, or are not expected to do, or actually are forbidden to do. So here's a list of those protests, non-cooperation, and intervention. So protest, symbolic acts, right? To show support or disapproval of an act or a policy, a group, or a government. Petitioning, we're familiar with that. Marches, singings, protest meetings, walkouts, like the walkouts in 1967 that we studied, that Philly students did to demand Black studies, led to this course. Non-cooperation is a step up. It's withdrawing some form of cooperation, existing cooperation with the opponent, or refusing to start a new form of cooperation that they would be expected to do. Social non-cooperation can be like a strike, students not going to school, demanding some change. Sanctuary, maybe when undocumented immigrants take sanctuary in a church, right? Economic non-cooperation, in that case, they're refusing to cooperate with deportation or that kind of thing. Economic non-cooperation, rent strikes, because the rent is too high, or the building is not getting improved, so they strike from rent. Consumer boycotts, labor strikes, or workers go on strike for usually higher wages, or sometimes for other things that could benefit the community. Political non-cooperation, boycotting elections, mutiny of soldiers. We see mutinies in a lot of colonial armies, for example, to boycott and non-cooperate with the colonial powers. Nonviolent intervention is an even higher exercise of collective power. These would include fasts, sit-ins, wade-ins. We see those in Florida and throughout the South. To wade into lake, or even in Chicago, to wade into lakes, swimming pools, and also oceans that were segregated. Nonviolent occupations, maybe of land, civil disobedience, seeking imprisonment to overload the jails. These are all forms of nonviolent intervention. And I want you to kind of use the definition from before about omission and commission to see if you can identify which elements, which specific examples are acts of omission and which specific examples are acts of commission. Commission, perhaps doing something that might not be expected to do. Protesting would be an act of commission, a march. But an act of omission might be a labor strike, withdrawing that labor, not something that they would be expected to do. A student strike would be an act of omission. Another framework that we need to understand, you might not fully understand it in this video, but you will once we start studying Montgomery bus boycott and Birmingham and other examples. So paradox of repression occurs when, and you might remember that term repression from our Unit 1 study of power and violence, occurs when nonviolent direct action campaign, and that campaign, when the opposition to that campaign uses physical or coercive force to try and repress or to stop that campaign. And while you would expect that force to stop or quell the campaign, it does the opposite. It leads to moral outrage. It actually helps the campaign grow. So, when the police try and stop a march from happening, but then more people join the next march because they saw on the television acts of police attacking people and they were outraged, and so it helps the movement grow. This is the paradox of repression. You would expect the repressive violence to end the campaign, but indeed it helps it to grow. And this actually is where the civil rights movement is genius. They use this to their advantage, trying to get incidents of violence against them to be advertised so that they can get their movement to grow and force the government to take action. So that's the paradox of repression. I guess I'll just say one more word here, which is that I also want you to pay attention to Dr. King quote. Pause, take a moment to read it. He really highlights the creative ways in which nonviolence is strategic. He knew that if they used violence, the opponents would be able to justify stopping their campaign and using violence against them. So nonviolence was intentionally a choice. It's not passive, it's active, and it's risky. And I want us to understand that, right? So, but yet there still is a real debate about and there is a difference between violence, self-defense, which we will discuss very closely with the Black Panther Party, and nonviolent strategy. These are three very different strategies. And Bayard Rustin talks about how, the only weapon, we need in every community a group of angelic troublemakers. The only weapon we have is our bodies, that we need to tuck them places so wheels don't turn. So using, this would really speak highly to the sit-ins, to try and disrupt society and make society not be able to function until Black civil rights, political rights, economic rights are met. And Bayard Rustin is a queer Black organizer from outside Philadelphia who ends up becoming a key advisor and strategist for the movement. Finally, this is where I'll end. When we study nonviolent action campaigns, we want to understand 6 things: the conditions of oppression, what are the laws, policies that oppress particular communities that the campaign tries to address, who are the leaders, the organizations that lead the campaign, who supports them, what does the campaign want changed, what methods do they use? This goes back to the protest and persuasion, non-cooperation and intervention. What is the opponent's response? Do they use violence? Is there a paradox of repression? And success. To what extent did the campaigns get met? Did the goals get met? Did they survive? Did the organization grow? Did more people join? Did a new organization form? These are all ways in which they could achieve success. Even if the goals weren't necessarily met, they might achieve some degree of success in growing the movement or grow organization. So when you each of the campaigns I'm signing, you will complete a chart where these 6 things get filled out. And so you'll see that on Classroom. That'll be posted on Classroom. All right, I look forward to diving into the Montgomery bus boycott with you in the next video. All right, everyone, take care.